Hello, and welcome to another segment of Setting Sail. Today, we're going to discuss, as I mentioned, the third Kikino principle. That's about learning, education. Every experience we have in the world, there's something that we need to gather from that. Education was really important to my dad. I think one of the reasons for that, and for my mother, one of the reasons for that was because at the age of 14, as I had mentioned earlier, he was requested to come to the United States by his dad, who was already here for about 10 years before that. And so that was the end of his formal education. And my mom, her mother became very ill, so in 8th grade, she had to leave school. And both of them really enjoyed school. They really found it stimulating. They loved questioning. They were really involved in that kind of thinking. In fact, my dad would always quote from Dante's Inferno. And I never knew what that was when I was a young child. Then I realized how complex and how interesting that was. And so he would use that as various examples during life. And I think during this pandemic, we need to keep in mind the idea of learning. It's been said that every situation we run into in our entire life will be there until we have learned something from it. As a practicing psychotherapist for 30 years, I would often help my clients understand things that happened in their life, not so much for the specifics of it, but what was underlying it. What was it that they learned from it? I found that many of the people who I saw had serious trauma in their life, and they were able to gain such resilience from it because they realized they were able to confront it and move beyond it. They learned a lot about themselves. Well, during this pandemic, I think it's important for us to take some time every day, really, to step back and say, what am I learning about myself? I went to school, I had nuns, and the nuns are they're pretty involved in your life. And as I mentioned earlier, I was one of those kids who kind of played it on the edge sometimes. Nothing terrible, but I was kind of a wise guy. And so there was one sister who took a particular interest in me, Sister Ethelreda. She was a real sharp woman. She was a very direct woman, but I also knew she was very caring. And one day she said to me, Francis, I'm going to give you a homework assignment for the rest of your life. I said, Sister, you can't do that. I don't do homework much. I'll never get out of this place. But she said, seriously, I want you to think about something. I want you to think at the end of each day, what did you learn new about yourself that day? And what did you learn new about the world? Now, at 15, I have to admit, I thought I knew all about the world and certainly knew all about myself. But what I realize now, in my 70s, is that there's so much more to learn. I will never learn it, but every day there's more to learn. And so one of the homework assignments, if you would, during the day, or maybe at the end of your day, is to ask yourself, what did I learn about myself as it relates to this pandemic? Maybe I have more patience than I realized. Or maybe I have less patience than I realized. And what did I learn new about the world? The world can change on a dime. No matter how much my plans are, it can change. But if I trust myself, can really develop that sense of I can get through this and a sense of resilience. And maybe that's something I can pass on to others when I'm in my apartment, by calling others or maybe when I interact with some of the staff. That this is terrible. This is a horrific thing that we're going through now, but we can learn a lot from it, and that's so important. For my dad, learning was important. He, at the age of about 16, he was drafted into the CCCs, and some of you might remember that, the Civilian Conservation Corps. It's a government agency to get young people to give them some skills. He was in it for 9 months, and he said it was a fantastic time. And one of the things he learned during that time was how to be a chef. In fact, one day he was requested for KP. He didn't know what that meant. So he went down and said, what's KP? And they said, well, it's kitchen police. He said, oh my gosh, I'm really going to be important. So he showed up the next morning, supposed to be there at 5 o'clock. I think he got there at 4. So the sergeant said, oh, you're really interested in this. So what I want you to do is go peel those potatoes. So my father peeled these potatoes really quickly. So he got done. He told the sergeant, hey, I'm done with the potatoes. Sarge pulled down a big lever and a whole mountain of potatoes came down again. And my father said, I think I'm going to go a little slower this time. But he really was into it because he had worked washing dishes and stuff in restaurants when he lived in Ithaca, New York. And so he got to know the sergeant. The sergeant said, "You like this work?" He started to, help him learn how to cook. My father started cooking. He liked it because he was able to get all the food he wanted, and he was really kind of built. And also, it allowed him to share his expertise with other people. Lo and behold, in his later years, he became the chef of his own restaurant. So learning is so important. So remember, this week, until we meet again, I'd like you to think about, what are you learning more about yourself during this pandemic, and what are the things that you're learning about the world? Thank you so much. Be well, and I look forward to seeing you to our next segment of Setting Sail.